Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, as Vladimir Putin claims Russian forces have taken key Ukrainian cities like Pokrovsk and Kupyansk, President Zelenskyy's visit to one of the cities directly challenges that narrative. At the same time, U.S. sanctions on Belarus are being eased in exchange for prisoner releases. Joining us today on TVP World to break down these topics is Michael MacKay, former lecturer at the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, a specialist in Russian disinformation as well as authoritarian influence campaigns. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into the interview, let's take a look at that video of Zelenskyy showing up in the city of Kupyansk, and I would like to get your comments on that. Let's take a look.
Today, I am in the Kupyansk sector with our warriors who are getting the job done for Ukraine here. The Russians kept going on and on about Kupyansk, but reality speaks for itself. I visited our troops and congratulated them. I thank each of the units, everyone who is fighting here, everyone who is destroying the occupier. Today, achieving results on the front line is crucial so that Ukraine can also achieve results in diplomacy. This is exactly how it works. All our strong military positions within the country translate into strong positions in the negotiations to end the war. Thank you to each and every warrior. I am proud of you, and I thank all of our land forces. Today is dedicated to celebrating you.
So what does Zelenskyy's visit to Kupyansk actually expose about the Russian military claims?
It exposes the extent of propaganda that underlies Russia's war effort, that Russia is very, very good at propaganda war, and it turns out they're not good at all at conventional or kinetic warfare. And what is significant about President Zelenskyy's visit is it is a very visceral, immediate challenge to that narrative. You notice the sign saying Kupyansk behind him, and it was all with bullet holes and so on. You also saw anti-drone netting. So this was not fakery. This was him at the outskirts of this city. And we know that there is fighting or there was fighting just a few kilometers away from where he filmed those images. So this was just a masterstroke to beat the Russians at their own game. Because let's not forget that the narrative that Russia is winning underlies the whole war plan that they're pushing through the Americans as a peace plan. That somehow Ukraine must capitulate and even surrender territory that they have never had to give up to the Russians. So this pierces that narrative, and it puts the focus back on the real war, which is the war in the ground, the invasion, which by no means is Russia winning. So I thought this was just, in a few seconds, it undermined months of work by the Putin regime to subvert American support for Ukraine and push this fake peace plan onto Ukraine and also other European countries.
Right, you mentioned earlier that Russians have dumped a lot of resources when it comes to this information warfare, and we're seeing the front line not just being on the ground, but also in the minds of people who are supporting Ukraine and also looking at this war. Can you help us break down why is it strategically important for Putin to fabricate victories in places like Pokrovsk and Kupyansk? Is it mostly because they want to get more advantage when it comes to these so-called peace negotiations?
Yes, because it has always been the Soviet and then the Russian practice to reinforce strength and distract from weakness. The actual invasion, what's really going on, is weak. Russia cannot win. Ukraine will eventually prevail. And to distract from that, the propaganda from Russians has to, first of all, avoid talking about the front, to get people talking about other things. And so, for example, Western media has no war reporters at the front to confirm or refute these claims by Putin, and so all they do is report them. And then when Ukrainians refute them, because there are no war reporters from Western news media, there's no way to confirm that. So it's a Putin says and Kiev claims kind of thing. So if there were war reporters, as there have been in almost other conflict, they would be in Kupyansk and see that it is being cleared by Ukrainian soldiers. They would be near Pokrovsk and see that there's a very fierce battle, but by no means do the Russians occupy that city. So I think Putin is at the end of decades of effective information warfare to get to the place where the key story of our time is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that's off the front pages, that's off the lead of television news to these other things, such as this fake peace plan.
All right, you just mentioned gathering information being very difficult, and I think we experience the same thing here on TVP World when covering the war front. There's a lot of comparing of information, and this is what the Ukrainian side reports, this is what the Russian side reports, and usually the truth is somewhere along those lines. Why do you think it is so difficult in this war in particular for this information fog of war to be pierced through?
I don't think that is true, that it's a one side says, other side says, because there's a tremendous advantage in today's environment that traditional news media is not exploiting, and that is open source intelligence. There's videos, there's recordings of everything. And if we used non-traditional methods, which open source intelligence researchers do, we would see that Russia is mostly lying, and Ukraine is actually the closest to an accurate narrative of what's happening on the front. But as long as we have a one side, other side, the consumers of information in the West are confused, and that's actually the goal of Russian propaganda, to doubt that there is truth anywhere to be found. And they've succeeded at that masterfully.
All right. Last but not least on this topic, I would like to ask, because you've been describing this peace plan as a fake a couple of times. Can you help us unpack that a little bit, why this is the term that you choose to use?
Well, a peace plan is directed towards peace, towards a ceasefire and stopping hostilities. But at no time has Russia ever said that it does not want to completely conquer Ukraine. They have always said that their war aim is to annihilate the Ukrainian nation, to make Ukraine as a fact, as a presence in the world, to go away. Ukraine is not a real country. Ukrainian is not a real language. It has no culture, ethnicity, history. So this genocidal intent has never changed. Russia has refused a ceasefire. Russia has refused any concession whatsoever. And given that no pressure has been put on them, how could we say that there is a peace deal when there is no grounding for negotiation? So that's why I call it fake, that it's actually an active measure carried out by Russia and pushed through intermediaries like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And the idea is to isolate Ukraine, neuter Europeans, you notice that they're out of the picture, and to shift the United States from its traditional alliances towards an alliance with Russia.
Right. And speaking of deal, we have a little bit of time. I would like to turn our attention to Belarus as well. How do you interpret this most recent act where the U.S. is lifting sanctions in exchange for the political prisoners?
Well, I question that linkage. See, that linkage was made by the Russians. Why were these sanctions put in the first place? Because these Belarusian individuals and entities pose a grave threat to international peace and security. And that's because Belarus is Russia's ally and participated in the launch of the Broad Offensive in 2022. It was launched from Belarusian territories. So the idea that somehow a favor can carve Belarus away from Russia is a fantasy that Russia wants to carve out because it's useful to them to have this proxy, which is what Belarus is, but appear to be an independent country. So I see this as, of course, it's personally wonderful for the people who are released. But there are many political prisoners still. There will be more people arrested now that the Russians who are in charge see that they can get away with this kind of thing. So I think that this is not a sign of a thaw, but a sign that the distract and divide and conquer strategy of the Putin regime is working to get a mental separation of Lukashenko and Putin in the Western imagination when there actually is no separation whatsoever. Lukashenko is a puppet of Putin, and Belarus is a part of the Russian terrorist state.
All right, you just mentioned a lot of people seeing this as a thawing of relation, and even the president's special envoy, John Cole, who did the negotiation, mentioned as such. And well, in one of his statements, he's describing Lukashenko's pivoting towards the West. But do you think that this is something with validity, or, like you mentioned earlier, it could be also part of a Kremlin-directed hybrid tactic?
It is a hybrid tactic. There is no chance that Lukashenko is in the West. After he falsified the election and seized dictatorial power, and there was a effective invasion by Russia, which they then exploited to the broad offensive into Ukraine, there is no chance that the person of Lukashenko can be brought on board. He is going to sink with Putin. So I think the American and European effort should be with the opposition, with Svetlana Svianutskaya and that circle of real patriotic Belarusians who understand Belarus's place in Europe. So it's a mistake to make a deal with the devil.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.